The sound that opened the story wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was the soft click of plastic against painted wall, the kind of sound no one notices. The house was quiet in the way homes often are in the late afternoon. Not silent, exactly. There was the hum of something electrical running in another room, the faint echo of movement upstairs, the normal breathing of a place where people live. But in the living room right then, there was only a little girl and the wall in front of her. She had been playing on the floor moments earlier. Something simple. Something forgotten already. A toy left half under the couch. A crumpled piece of paper. The kind of activity that doesn't ask for attention. Then her eyes wandered, as children's eyes always do, toward something that didn't belong. The outlet cover. It wasn't hanging off completely. That would have been obvious. That would have been fixed already. It was just loose. One corner lifted slightly away from the wall, enough to create a thin shadow behind it. Enough to catch the attention of someone small, curious, and unaware of consequences. The plastic edge moved when the air shifted, barely noticeable, but to her it was something new, something interesting, something that didn't look finished. She stood up slowly, the way children do when they're not sure if they're allowed to move or not. Her socked feet made no sound on the floor. She didn't call out. She didn't look around. There was no reason to. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just looking. Her fingers reached out and brushed the edge of the outlet cover. It moved. Just a little. Her brow furrowed, not in fear, but in focus. She pressed again, more firmly this time. The plastic shifted under her touch, a quiet click answering her curiosity. Somewhere else in the house, water ran. A door closed softly. Life continued without noticing this small, dangerous moment forming. This is how it always starts. Not with chaos, with calm. Before anything else can happen, let me tell you this because it matters. The woman who should have been watching her, the one who would have noticed that loose cover immediately, had already passed. She wasn't gone from memory. She wasn't erased from the house. But she wasn't there in the way that hands-on protection requires. And yet, protection still existed. If you believe in coincidence, this will sound like coincidence. If you believe in timing, it will sound like timing. But the truth is quieter than that. Subscribe and leave a like if stories like this resonate with you, because some moments deserve to be noticed before they're forgotten. The little girl lowered herself onto her knees. The wall felt cool against her fingertips. She leaned closer, bringing her face nearer to the outlet, studying it the way she studied bugs in the garden or crumbs on the table. There was no fear in her movements, only intent. She hooked her fingernail under the edge of the cover and pulled. It resisted. Then, shifted again. In the hallway, a floorboard creaked under an adult's step, but the sound didn't reach her ears. Upstairs, something thumped lightly, the settling noise of a house alive with normal motion. No one was looking at the wall. No one was counting seconds, except time itself. The outlet cover wobbled, hanging on by one side now. It should have fallen. It should have dropped cleanly into her hand. It didn't. Instead, the screw caught for half a second longer than it should have. The plastic bent, flexing just enough to delay what was coming. She tugged again, a little impatient now, her focus narrowing. Her other hand touched the wall for balance. Somewhere deep in the house, a phone vibrated and slid off a counter, hitting the floor with a sharp sound. Not loud enough to alarm anyone, just loud enough to pull attention for a fraction of a moment. Her head turned slightly toward the noise. Not fully, just enough. Her hand paused. The outlet cover shifted again. Closer now, to coming off completely. She turned back, ready to finish what she'd started, unaware of how close she was to something that couldn't be taken back. And in that pause, that breath between curiosity and consequence, the protection that didn't have a body, didn't have a voice, held the moment still just long enough, Because sometimes the difference between safe and sorry is no more than a second that shouldn't exist. And this story is only just beginning. The pause didn't feel like a pause to her. It felt like curiosity winning its patience. She shifted her weight on her knees, closer now, close enough that her breath fogged the wall just slightly. The outlet cover trembled again under the pressure of her fingers, that soft plastic click repeating, a sound too small to matter to anyone else in the house. To her, it was confirmation. Things that move are meant to be moved. Things that come loose are meant to come off. Her fingernail slid deeper under the edge. Somewhere behind her, the house responded in its own quiet language. A pipe knocked faintly. The refrigerator adjusted its hum. The rhythm of the place remained steady, indifferent to the fact that one child-sized hand was inches away from something it had no right to understand. This is the danger of ordinary days. Nothing announces itself. The woman who should have noticed had already passed, and yet traces of her were still everywhere. The light switch she always flicked off with her knuckle instead of her finger. The habit of leaving shoes aligned by the door. The faint smell of the soap she used that no one else bought anymore. These things stayed, even when she didn't, and sometimes so did her timing. The screw that held the outlet cover gave a fraction more than before. The plastic bent outward, enough now that the dark oval behind it was visible. Just a hint. Just enough to invite one more pull. Her hand lifted. At the same exact moment, a draft moved through the room. It wasn't strong. It didn't slam a door or rattle a window. It was the kind of air shift that comes from someone opening a door on the other side of the house, the kind you don't notice unless you're already still. The cover tapped softly against the wall. She froze, startled, not scared, just surprised. Her eyes flicked to the side, toward the hallway. Nothing followed, no voice, no footsteps coming faster. Silence again. She turned back, closer now, closer than before. Her fingers curled, ready to pull. Time stretched in. That way it sometimes does, not dramatically, not visibly, but perceptibly. A moment that should pass simply doesn't. It lingers. It waits to see what you'll do with it. Upstairs, an adult shifted position, adjusting weight on a chair. Downstairs, the clock ticked. The second hand moved once, then again. Her fingertip brushed the edge of the outlet itself. Not enough to hurt, not enough to stop her. She leaned in. And then, without warning, the outlet cover slipped free completely. It didn't fall into her hand the way she expected. It dropped sideways, skidding across the floor instead, sliding just out of reach with a soft, scraping sound. She blinked, confused, momentarily distracted by the unexpected direction. Things usually fall straight down. This one didn't. She reached for it instinctively, shifting her knees, turning her body away from the wall for just a second. That second mattered, because the moment her hand left the wall, a voice called her name from another room. Not sharp, not panicked, just normal, just enough to pull her attention fully away. She answered automatically, loud and clear, the way children do when they're sure nothing is wrong. "I'm here!" The adult stepped into the doorway seconds later and stopped cold. The outlet, the exposed opening, the loose cover on the floor, the color drained from their face faster than they realized. Their heart picked up speed without asking permission. They crossed the room in 3 long steps and scooped her up, holding her tighter than usual, tighter than necessary, because now the picture was complete. Now they could see it. They didn't scold her. They didn't raise their voice. They didn't even say much at all. They fixed the outlet, secured the cover, moved furniture, checked every plug in the room with hands that shook just slightly. And when they were done, when the danger had been put back into hiding where it belonged, they sat on the floor and held her, pressing their forehead against the top of. Her head, breathing in and out until the image faded. She didn't know why they were holding her like that. She didn't need to. Later, after she had wandered off to play somewhere else, the adult stood alone in the living room, staring at the wall where it had almost gone wrong. They replayed it over and over. The what if, the almost. The way the cover had slid sideways instead of down. It didn't make sense. The screw should have dropped it straight into her hand, unless something had shifted it. Unless something had delayed her just enough. They shook their head, dismissing the thought, because adults learn early how to explain away things they can't see. They blamed gravity, old hardware, luck. They didn't think about the woman who had already passed, not consciously, not directly. But that night, as they turned off the lights, they paused by the doorway. The room felt held, not watched, held, as if something had settled back into place once the danger was gone. And in the quiet, ordinary darkness, the protection that never announced itself remained exactly where it always had been, waiting. Because next time, the danger wouldn't look like this, and it wouldn't give them as much time. The next day didn't arrive with a warning either. It never does. Morning light slid through the curtains in thin, pale bands, landing on the same living room floor where the outlet cover had almost become something else. The furniture was in nearly the same place, except for small changes. That looked harmless. A chair nudged farther from the wall. A couch shifted a few inches as if the room had exhaled during the night. The outlet cover sat perfectly flat now, its screw tightened so snugly it looked new. The adult told themselves it was handled. Fixed. Done. They made breakfast, they poured cereal, they wiped a spill. They answered a message on their phone while the little girl talked about something that mattered deeply to her and to no one else. Ordinary things. The kind of things that convince you danger has been properly stored away for later. But the thing about danger is that it rarely repeats itself in the same costume. The little girl wandered back into the living room mid-morning, dragging a blanket behind her like a cape. She wasn't thinking about the outlet anymore. She had already replaced it with something new in her mind. Something glittery, something imaginary, something that didn't ask for rules. Children move on quickly. They don't linger on almost the way adults do. Still, her body remembered a kind of interest, a kind of pattern. Walls held mysteries, corners held surprises, small spaces held things that were hidden. And even though the outlet was now secure, her attention was easily redirected to the same general area, like a compass needle pulling towards something unseen. She crouched near the wall again, not because the cover was loose, but because her toy had rolled under the edge of the couch. It was one of those tiny pieces that mattered only because it belonged to the set. She reached in, her cheek nearly brushing the carpet, and her hand moved blindly in the dark. Her fingers touched dust, then fabric, then something else. A cable. She pulled it slightly, trying to hook her toy with it. The cable tugged back with the stubborn resistance of something plugged in. She frowned, annoyed, and pulled again. In the kitchen, the adult was rinsing dishes. The water ran. Their shoulders were tense in the normal way of someone holding too many responsibilities at once. They were thinking about appointments, messages, work they needed to finish. They weren't thinking about cables behind the couch because cables behind the couch are boring. Cables behind the couch are ordinary. The little girl pulled again. A power strip slid an inch, hidden behind the couch's skirt. She couldn't see it, but she felt the movement. That was enough for her. Movement meant progress. Progress meant keep going. She wriggled farther under, her small arm disappearing up to the elbow. Her fingertips found the edge of the strip. She tugged it outward, inch by inch, until it finally slid free and emerged into the light. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just a plastic bar with too many plugs and too many cords branching from it like roots. One cord fed the lamp. One fed the router. One fed a charger. It looked harmless. It looked like nothing, but it lay on the floor now, exposed, and that mattered. Her eyes narrowed at the little red switch on the strip. She'd seen adults press buttons before. Buttons were invitations. Buttons were a kind of power she didn't fully understand but wanted to. She pressed it. The lamp blinked. The router's tiny light flickered. Somewhere in the kitchen, a faint beep came from an appliance resetting itself. The adult paused at the sink, brow furrowing. It wasn't enough to cause concern, just enough to register. They turned their head, listening. Silence again. The little girl pressed the switch again, watching the lights respond like a game. She smiled, delighted. In her mind, she wasn't risking anything. She was controlling something. She was making the room react to her. She pressed it again, and this time one of the plugs was loose. Not loose enough to fall out, just loose enough to wiggle. The prongs inside the strip shifted, sparking not visibly, not with a flash, but with a faint, almost inaudible sizzle that would have gone unnoticed if the room hadn't been so quiet. The smell came first. A hint of hot plastic. Not strong, not dramatic, just wrong. She leaned closer, curious about the scent, her nose wrinkling. Her hand hovered over the plug. She didn't know what hot meant in this context. She only knew it was new. She touched it. Not the metal, not inside, just the outer casing. It was warmer than expected. That made her pull back, then lean in again, then pull back again. A tiny loop of curiosity and caution. And then she did what children do when they want to understand something. She tried to move it. Her fingers wrapped around the plug and wiggled it. The cord shifted. The strip shifted. The loose connection shifted again. The faint sizzle grew slightly louder. The adult in the kitchen turned off the water. The sudden quiet made the room feel exposed, as if the house had stopped breathing. They listened again. This time they heard something small, something almost nothing. A soft crackle. They dried their hands quickly on a towel and stepped toward the living room. Not running, not panicking, just moving with the alertness of someone who has learned, recently, that almost can happen in seconds. The little girl heard the footsteps and froze, fingers still on the plug. Her shoulders rose slightly, the way they do when you're caught doing something you don't know is wrong but feel might be. She turned her head, eyes wide, ready to explain, ready to smile, ready to pretend it was nothing. At that exact moment, the power strip shifted again. It shouldn't have. Her hand wasn't pushing it hard. The floor wasn't sloped. The couch wasn't moving. There was no obvious reason for the strip to slide, but it did. It slid just enough to pull the loose plug away from her grip. It slipped free from her fingers like a bar of soap, landing with a dull thud. She startled, jerking her hand back, and the adult saw it all in one snapshot. The strip, the plug, the child's hand too close. They crossed the room fast now, scooping her up and moving her away. Their heart pounded harder than it had the day before, because this time they hadn't noticed anything loose. They hadn't known anything needed fixing. They unplugged the entire strip, yanking it out of the wall with a force that made the cord snap against the baseboard. They crouched, inspecting it, smelling it, feeling the warmth with the back of their knuckles the way they'd learned to test a bottle's temperature. It was warm, not burning, but warm enough. They sat back, on their heels, staring at the thing like it had betrayed them, like it had been waiting. The little girl, now on the couch beside them, swung her legs and watched with calm curiosity. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was just confused about why the adult looked like that, why their face had changed, why their breathing had changed. "What's that smell?" she asked softly. The adult swallowed. Their throat felt tight. They glanced at her, then away, then back again. They wanted to say something comforting. They wanted to say something simple, but the truth was complicated. The world was full of invisible risks, and the person who had been best at spotting them was no longer here. "It's nothing," they lied gently, because that's what adults do when they don't know how to explain a truth without scaring someone small. They carried the strip to the kitchen and threw it into a drawer as if hiding it made it harmless. Then they went back and rearranged the living room again. Cords were lifted. Plugs were checked. The couch was pulled away from the wall. The outlet cover was inspected once more. The screw tightened once more, as if tightening could soothe their nervous system. Then, in an effort to reset the day, they suggested something else. A snack, a show, a different game, anything that didn't involve electricity or hidden corners. The little girl accepted happily. She didn't argue. She didn't cling to the power strip. It had already become less interesting once it stopped responding to her. But the adult couldn't let it go so easily. That afternoon, when the house fell quiet again, they found themselves standing in the hallway outside the living room, staring at the wall with the outlet, staring at the floor where the strip had been, listening to the home's hum as if it was trying to speak. They thought about the woman who had already passed, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just in the way a person thinks about someone when they realize how much they relied on them for things they never noticed. She would have seen the loose outlet cover days earlier. She would have replaced the strip the moment it smelled wrong. She would have noticed the cable behind the couch before a child ever reached it. The adult's chest tightened with a grief that didn't ask permission. It wasn't loud grief. It was practical grief. The grief of noticing the missing hands in ordinary moments. They shook their head, blinking hard, and forced themselves to move. Dinner needed to be made. Clothes needed to be washed. Life didn't stop because fear was loud. Still, that night, they didn't sleep the same. They checked on the little girl more than once. They stood in her doorway and watched her breathe, watched her small chest rise and fall. They adjusted her blanket. They moved a stuffed animal away from her face. They listened to the quiet house, waiting for some sound that would tell them something was wrong. Nothing came. Near midnight, they went downstairs for water. The kitchen light stayed off. They moved in the dim glow from the street outside. The house felt different at night. Every shadow looked like a shape. Every creak sounded like a footstep. They poured water, drank it, then stood there with the glass in their hand, feeling the weight of being the only one awake. A small noise came from the living room. Not a crash, not a bang, a soft click. They froze, glass halfway to the counter. Their heart kicked up like it had been waiting for this. They listened again. Another click. Then silence. The adult took a slow step toward the living room, barefoot on cool tile, moving quietly the way you move when you don't want to startle whatever might be there. Their mind offered explanations. Settling furniture, a cord shifting, the house making noise. But their body didn't believe those explanations. They reached the doorway and peered in. The living room was dark, lit only by the faint orange light from the router's corner. The couch sat in its new position, pulled away from the wall. The floor was clear. The outlet cover was secure. Nothing moved. Then they saw it. A small nightlight, the one that plugged into the lower outlet near the baseboard. It had been there for months, the little glow that made the hallway less scary for a child who sometimes woke up thirsty. It was supposed to be on. It was off. The adult frowned. They were sure it had been on earlier. They stepped closer and knelt, the way they'd seen their wife kneel so, many times to check things at a child's level. They placed 2 fingers on the nightlight. It was warm. Not just warm, warmer than it should have been, the kind of warmth that made you pull your fingers back instinctively. Their breath caught. They leaned in, sniffing. That same faint scent again. Hot plastic, subtle but unmistakable once you knew it. They reached for the plug. and before their fingers touched it, the nightlight flickered. Once, twice. A tiny pulse of light in the dark like a signal. The adult's hand froze in midair. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier, as if the house had shifted its attention onto this one spot. The adult swallowed, throat dry, and pulled their hand back slightly. The nightlight flickered again, then went steady, glowing dimly, as if it had decided to behave now that someone was watching. The adult stared at it, kneeling there, heart pounding, trying to decide if they were imagining things. Electrical issues happen. Nightlights fail. Outlets get old. This could be normal. This could be nothing. But it was the second day in a row that something electrical had nearly become a problem, and it was happening in the same corner of the house. They reached again, slower this time, fingers extended toward the plug, ready to pull it out. They didn't want to wait until morning. They didn't want to explain this away. They wanted it gone. Their fingertips were an inch away. The nightlight flickered hard, brighter this time, a sudden blink that made the shadows jump. The adult jerked back, startled despite themselves. Their glass of water tipped slightly, spilling a few drops onto the floor. The drops hit the tile with tiny taps, and in the dim light, they looked like nothing. But the adult's mind latched onto one thing instantly: water. Outlet. Electricity. Their stomach dropped. They grabbed a towel from the counter and wiped the floor fast, hands shaking now. Their breathing turned shallow. They were suddenly aware of how thin the line was between normal and catastrophic, how quickly a house could turn into a trap without meaning to. They looked back at the nightlight. It was steady again, calm, innocent. The adult hesitated, hand hovering, torn between fear and urgency. "Pull it now," they told themselves. "Pull it and be done." They reached again. And just as their fingers closed around the plug, a sound came from upstairs, soft but sharp enough to cut through the adult's focus. A child's voice. Sleep thick, confused. A small whimper. The adult froze, plug still in their grip, eyes darting toward the staircase. The nightlight's glow seemed to widen, spilling more light across the baseboard than it should have. The adult's brain split in two directions. The child upstairs, awake, the plug in their hand, warm. They stood quickly, abandoning the outlet for the moment, and rushed toward the stairs, taking them two at a time without thinking. Every instinct said, child first. Always child first. Upstairs, the little girl was sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes, hair messy, face slack with sleep. She looked small in the dim room, like a fragile thing that belonged to someone else. "What is it?" the adult asked, voice low, trying not to scare her. She blinked. Her gaze drifted past the adult, toward the hallway, toward the faint glow coming from downstairs. Then she whispered, as if repeating something she'd heard in a dream. "The light, it blinked." The adult's blood ran cold. Because she hadn't been downstairs, she couldn't have seen it. And yet, she said it like she knew. The adult swallowed, forcing a calm expression, smoothing her hair back. "It's okay," they said softly. "Go back to sleep." The little girl's eyes stayed on the doorway for a moment longer, as if listening to something the adult couldn't hear. Then she lay back down, turning her face into her pillow, already drifting. The adult waited until her breathing steadied again. Then they backed out of the room and moved down the hallway, slower now, quieter. Their heart didn't slow. Their mind raced, connecting dots it didn't want to connect. Downstairs, the living room was still lit by the nightlight's faint glow. The adult stepped into the room and stopped. The nightlight was off again, and in the darkness where it had been glowing, a thin thread of smoke rose silently from the outlet, barely visible, curling upward like a warning that had arrived one breath too late. The adult didn't move at first. Not because they didn't know what to do, but because their body had that brief, stubborn refusal to accept what their eyes were showing them. Smoke in a living room didn't fit the shape of an ordinary night. It belonged to other people's stories, other houses, other headlines. The thread of smoke was thin, almost polite, as if even it didn't want to make a scene. It rose from the outlet in a slow curl, then disappeared into the darkness above it. The adult took one step forward, then stopped. Again. Their mind flashed through images it didn't want. A spark, a flame, the kind of sudden sound that makes you run. Their pulse hammered so hard it felt loud in their ears, drowning out everything else. They could smell it now, unmistakable. Hot plastic, hot metal, the wrong kind of warm. Their gaze snapped to the staircase. Upstairs, the little girl was in bed, breathing, safe for the moment. The adult moved on instinct, not toward the outlet, but toward control. They didn't switch on lights. They didn't want to create another variable. They moved quickly into the kitchen, feeling along the wall for the drawer that held a flashlight, hands shaking just enough to make the metal rattle. When the beam clicked on, the room sharpened into clarity. The outlet was darker than the wall around it, the nightlight still plugged in, but lifeless. Smoke kept rising in that same thin line, as if the wall itself were exhaling. The adult knelt again, slower now, not wanting to jolt anything. The flashlight beam trembled as it moved across the baseboard, revealing the smallest detail. The outlet cover was secure, but the plastic looked slightly warped at the edge. So subtle it could be missed in daylight. So clear now that it mattered. Their throat tightened. They forced air in and out, trying to keep their breathing quiet. The adult's first thought was to pull the nightlight out. Their second thought was, don't touch it. It's strange how quickly a person learns new fear. Yesterday, the fear had been a child's fingers. Today, the fear was electricity that looked calm until it wasn't. They stood up, keeping their eyes on the outlet as if looking away might make it worse. The adult backed into the hallway, then turned and moved fast toward the panel near the laundry area. They had seen their wife do it once, long ago when the microwave had tripped a breaker. She'd made it look easy, like something you do without thinking. The adult didn't feel easy now. Their fingers fumbled for the panel door. The flashlight beam danced across labels and switches. Their brain searched for the right one, the way you search for a word when panic steals your vocabulary. Living room, hall, outlets. They flipped the switch. The house changed immediately. The hum of electronics stopped. The faint glow of the router died. The air felt heavier, quieter. The outlet smoke slowed, then stopped, as if the wall had finally been told to stop holding its breath. The adult stood there in the, dark, listening to the silence they had created, heart pounding harder than before. Then they remembered the child upstairs. They moved back toward the stairs quickly, flashlight off now so the beam wouldn't flicker under the child's door like a ghost. They climbed with careful steps, trying not to make noise, trying not to turn this into a scene that would live in her memory. In her room, she slept, her small body curled into the blanket. Her face was relaxed, peaceful. The adult stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment, the way a person watches something precious after almost losing it. Even if they didn't lose it at all, they didn't wake her. They didn't want her to feel fear in her own bed. They backed away, then walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom, toward the empty side of the bed that was still made the same way it had always been made. Even months later, even after routines shifted and drawers changed and laundry got folded differently, that side of the bed still looked untouched. It looked like a habit that refused to break. The adult sat on the edge, elbows on knees, head bowed, and pressed their palms against their eyes. The woman who had already passed wasn't supposed to be part of a story about an outlet. But she was, because she had been part of everything that kept the house safe. Not by magic, by noticing, by being the kind of person who saw loose covers, warm plugs, hidden cords, by caring about small things before they became big things. The adult realized in a sudden, painful clarity that they had been living inside her awareness for years without knowing it. They had been protected not only by her love, but by her attention. She had been the quiet shield between the child and the world's invisible edges. Now that shield was gone. And that was what made the smoke terrifying. The adult stood again, restless, and went to the hallway closet where they kept a small box of tools. It wasn't much. A screwdriver, a few spare screws, a roll of tape. The kind of box you keep because you're supposed to, because adults are supposed to have tools. Their wife had always known where it was. She had always used it without making a thing of it. The adult opened the box and stared at the screwdriver as if it were a foreign object. Their hands shook as they picked it up. They went downstairs again, moving through the dark house now without the soft electronic hum. The kitchen felt colder. The living room felt larger without, the glow of the nightlight, and router, as if the edges of the room had stretched. They knelt in front of the outlet again, flashlight back on. Without power, everything felt safer, but the adult's nerves didn't believe it. The smell lingered faintly, like a warning that didn't evaporate just because you turned the switch off. They placed the screwdriver tip near the outlet cover screw, hesitated, then began to turn. The screw resisted at first, then loosened. The adult's breath came shallow. Their mind filled with images. If they remove the cover, will they see something burned? Will they see proof of how close it was? Will they find out this has been happening longer than they knew? They removed the cover carefully and set it aside on the floor. The outlet underneath was slightly discolored around one socket. Not black, not charred, but darker than it should have been. The kind of discoloration you might dismiss in daylight, the kind you might never notice until it announces itself, with smoke. The adult swallowed hard. They didn't know enough to fix it. They knew that. But they also knew enough to understand that this was not something to ignore. This was not something to tape over and forget. This was a line in the story that could have ended differently. Their hand moved toward the nightlight, now unplugged from the wall by the simple fact that the breaker was off and the adult finally dared to touch it. They pulled it out slowly. It felt warm even now, as if it had stored heat in its tiny body. They set it on the floor beside the cover and stared at it, as if it were the villain. Then something happened that made them go still. In the silence, in the dark, there was a sound that didn't belong to the room. A soft creak from the hallway. It wasn't the settling of wood. It wasn't the refrigerator because the refrigerator was off. It was the kind of sound you hear when someone shifts weight on a floorboard. The adult's flashlight beam lifted toward the hallway, without meaning to. Nothing was there. The beam traced the empty doorframe, the corridor, the staircase. No shadows moved, no shapes, just the empty house. Their skin prickled anyway. They turned the beam back to the outlet, forcing themselves to focus on what was real. The screw holes, the metal, the discolored edge, the smell. And then, as if the house wanted to remind them that reality is rarely stable, the adult's phone vibrated in their pocket. The sudden buzz made them flinch. They pulled it out, screen lighting their face in a pale glow. A message from a neighbor, sent hours earlier, now arriving because the phone finally found a signal again in the quiet. "Hey, did your power flicker earlier? Ours did." The adult stared at the words until they blurred. So it wasn't just their house. There had been a flicker, a surge, something that might have made a weak outlet worse. A reason, an explanation, a rational thread to hold on to. Their shoulders loosened just a fraction, and still, they couldn't forget what the little girl had said upstairs. The light, it blinked. How had she known? The adult tried to force their thoughts into order. They told themselves, children hear things. Children sense adults' tension. She might have heard the adult moving downstairs. She might have heard the switch. She might have heard the faint click. She might have dreamed it. But the truth was, the adult hadn't turned on any lights. They hadn't made noise. They had moved like a shadow. And yet, the child had spoken as if she had seen the blink. The adult sat back on their heels and closed their eyes for one long breath. In that breath, memory came uninvited. Not a dramatic montage, just a small scene, clear as if it had happened yesterday. The woman who had already passed, kneeling in this same spot months ago, tightening this same outlet cover with a screwdriver in her hand. She had been humming softly, not even thinking about it. The little girl, younger then, had been sitting behind, her with a stuffed animal watching her mother's hands. The mother had turned, smiled, and said something like, "Not for little fingers." She had tightened the screw, patted the cover once, and moved on with her day. The adult's chest tightened again. Grief rolled through them like a slow wave. They hadn't thought of that moment in a long time. It hadn't seemed important then. It had been ordinary. Now it felt like a lesson. The adult opened their eyes and stared at the outlet again, as if looking at it might reveal an answer. The walls stayed silent. The outlet stayed still. But the air in the room felt held, not haunted, not supernatural. Just as if something had been paying attention long before the adult knew to pay attention. They stood up slowly, keeping the outlet uncovered, the breaker still off. They would call someone in the morning, an electrician, a professional, someone who knew what to do. They would not pretend this was fine. They gathered the nightlight and outlet, cover, placed them on the kitchen counter, then walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The house felt too quiet now, too dark. The adult took a step up, then paused. A faint sound came from upstairs. Not a voice, not crying. A soft shuffle, like small feet moving on carpet. The adult's stomach dropped. The little girl was supposed to be asleep. She was supposed to be safe in bed. The adult climbed quickly but quietly, heart hammering, moving toward her room. At the top of the stairs, the hallway was dim. Moonlight spilled across the floor in a pale strip. The adult took 2 steps forward and stopped. The little girl stood in the hallway, barefoot, half asleep, hair messy, eyes heavy. She wasn't looking at the adult. She was looking past them, down toward the stairs, toward the darkness below, toward the place where the nightlight had been blinking. Her small hand was extended not fully, just slightly, as if she were pointing without meaning to. The adult whispered her name, trying not to scare her. "Hey, come back to bed." The little girl blinked slowly. Then, in a voice so quiet it barely carried, she said, "It's hot." The adult's blood went cold all over again, because the breaker was off, and the outlet downstairs was supposed to be quiet. The adult stepped toward her, reaching out, but the little girl's gaze stayed locked down the stairs, as if she were listening to something the adult couldn't hear. Then the adult smelled it. Hot plastic, stronger than before, and it was coming from downstairs. The smell shouldn't have been there. That was the first thought that locked everything else in place. The breaker was off. The outlet downstairs had been opened, exposed, rendered harmless by the absence of power. The nightlight was unplugged and sitting on the counter. There was no logical reason for the scent to return, let alone stronger. And yet it was unmistakable. Hot plastic doesn't ask permission. It doesn't drift politely. It pushes its way into your awareness, sharp and wrong, carrying with it a message your body understands faster than your mind does. The adult moved first, not toward the smell, but toward the child. They knelt and gently took her by the shoulders, turning her so she faced the bedroom instead of the stairs. Her skin was warm with sleep. Her eyes were unfocused, glassy, like she was only halfway present. "Hey," the adult whispered, forcing calm into their voice. "You're okay. Let's go back to bed." She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She let herself be guided back into her room, sat on the mattress, crawled under the blanket the way she had 100 times before. But her eyes didn't close right away. They stayed open, tracking something invisible above the adult's shoulder. "It's hot," she repeated, softer now, like a thought she hadn't meant to say out loud. The adult smoothed her hair, tucked the blanket tighter, and nodded as if acknowledging a feeling rather than a fact. "I know," they said, even though they didn't. "I'll take care of it." When her eyes finally closed again, the adult waited. They counted breaths. They watched her chest rise and fall. They waited until the tension drained from her small body, until sleep reclaimed her completely. Only then did the adult stand. The hallway felt narrower on the way back, the darkness thicker, the smell stronger with every step downward. It didn't come in a rush. It layered itself, building slowly, like something heating from the inside. At the bottom of the stairs, the adult stopped. The living room was darker than before, not just unlit, but swallowed. The flashlight beam cut a thin path through it, revealing corners that looked unfamiliar without their usual glow. Shadows crowded the edges of the room. The air felt heavy, dense in a way it hadn't earlier. The smell was coming from the wall, not the outlet this time. Higher. The adult's breath caught. Their flashlight lifted slowly, tracing the wall upward, inch by inch, until the beam stopped on something that made their stomach drop. The lamp. The floor lamp that stood beside the couch, the one they had pulled slightly away from the wall earlier that day. It was unplugged. They were sure of it. They remembered pulling the cord free, looping it neatly, setting it aside as part of their frantic effort to make the room safer. But the lamp was warm, not glowing, not lit, just warm. The adult stepped closer, the beam steady now despite their shaking hand. They reached out and hovered their fingers near the metal pole, feeling heat radiate from it like a quiet warning. How? Their mind raced through explanations, residual heat from earlier use, a faulty internal component holding warmth longer than expected, a coincidence, a mistake in memory. They checked the cord. It lay on the floor, unplugged, the prongs facing up, unmistakable in the flashlight's beam. The smell thickened. The adult backed away slowly, scanning the room for any other source. The couch, the rug, the wall. Everything looked still, ordinary, unchanged, and yet something was wrong, deeply wrong. They moved toward the kitchen again, this time with urgency sharp enough to cut through fear. They opened a window, pushing it up just enough to let cool night air rush in. The smell thinned slightly, but didn't disappear. They grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink. It felt heavier than they remembered. They set it on the counter, within reach, then turned back toward the living room. The lamp hadn't moved, but the wall behind it looked different. The flashlight beam lingered there, tracing the paint. There was no flame, no visible damage, but there was a faint ripple in the air, the kind you see above a hot road on a summer day. Subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Heat. The adult's pulse hammered. They took a step closer, then another, moving slowly, deliberately, as if the wall itself might react to sudden movement. They placed the back of their hand near the surface. It was warm, not scalding, not burning, but warm in a way walls should never be. Their mouth went dry. They stepped back quickly, turning toward the stairs, toward the bedroom where the little girl slept. Every instinct screamed one thing: get her out, now. They didn't stop to think. They moved fast, taking the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom and scooping her up from the bed in one smooth motion. She stirred, murmured, confused but not fully awake. "It's okay," the adult whispered, holding her close. "We're just going downstairs." She rested her head against their shoulder, trusting, unaware of how close the house had come to changing everything. The adult carried her down the stairs and into the kitchen, away from the living room wall, away from the heat. They wrapped her in a blanket and set her gently into a chair, then knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Stay here," they said softly. "Don't move. I'll be right back." She nodded, already, drifting again, comforted by the blanket, by the adult's presence, by the fact that someone was handling whatever had woken her. The adult turned back toward the living room, heart pounding so hard it hurt. They grabbed their phone from the counter and dialed emergency services, finger hovering over the call button. They hesitated. No flames, no sparks, no alarms. Yet. They moved closer to the wall again, extinguisher in hand, phone pressed to their ear now, the line ringing. The flashlight beam shook as it traced the baseboard, the outlet area, the lamp, the wall. The smell spiked suddenly. A sharper note cut through it, metallic and urgent. The adult didn't wait for the call to connect. They squeezed the extinguisher handle and aimed low, spraying a white cloud across the wall, the outlet area, the floor. The sound was loud in the small room, startling in its violence. The cloud billowed, filling the space, coating everything in powder. The wall disappeared behind it. The adult coughed, eyes burning, but didn't stop until the extinguisher ran empty. When it did, the room fell quiet again, except for the adult's ragged breathing. The smell faded slightly, replaced by the sharp tang of chemicals. They stood there, frozen, listening. No crackle, no hiss, no sound of spreading fire. The phone vibrated in their hand. The call had connected. They stepped into the kitchen to speak, voice low and controlled as they explained what they had smelled, what they had seen, what they feared. The operator asked questions. The adult answered them. Yes, the breaker was off. Yes, the child was safe. Yes, there had been smoke earlier. Yes, there was heat in the wall. Help was on the way. The adult hung up and leaned against the counter, chest heaving. They looked toward the kitchen chair. The little girl was awake now, not scared, not crying. She sat wrapped in the blanket, feet dangling, eyes fixed on the doorway to the living room. Her expression wasn't fear. It was concentration, as if she were listening. The adult followed her gaze, heart skipping. The living room was filled with extinguisher dust, the air hazy. But in the middle of it, the lamp's cord lay exactly where the adult had left it, except now it was coiled differently. Not neatly, not randomly. It was pulled away from the wall, stretched farther into the room, as if someone had moved it deliberately, creating distance between the heat and anything flammable. The adult stared, trying to remember if they had done that in the rush. They searched their memory for the motion, the moment, the intention. They found nothing. The little girl spoke softly, her voice calm in a way that didn't match the chaos around them. "She said it was too hot there," she murmured. The adult's breath caught. They stepped closer to her. "Who said that?" The little girl shrugged slightly, the blanket slipping off one shoulder. "Mom," she said, not with certainty, not with drama. Just as a child states a fact they don't know, needs explaining. The adult closed their eyes for a brief, desperate moment. They didn't argue. They didn't ask more. They just pulled the blanket tighter around her and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, grounding themselves in something real. Outside, distant sirens cut through the night. The adult exhaled slowly. Whatever had happened in that wall, whatever had shifted cords and delayed heat and pulled danger just far enough away, it had done its job. This time. The sirens grew louder, closer now, washing the house in red and white flashes that reflected off the windows. The adult felt the world tilt back toward order, toward rules and professionals and explanations. They held the little girl close as the lights painted the walls. But as the sirens reached the driveway, the adult felt something else, something colder than fear. Because when they glanced back toward the living room one last time, through the haze of extinguisher dust and flashing light, they saw the outlet cover sitting on the floor, not where they had left it. Turned over, as if someone had checked it again. And in that moment, the adult understood something that made their stomach drop. The danger wasn't finished. It had just been interrupted. The first knock on the door didn't sound like rescue. It sounded like reality arriving late, 2 firm raps, then a voice through the wood, professional and calm. "Hello, fire department." The adult's hands tightened around the little girl's. Shoulders as if holding her could anchor the whole house. They crossed the kitchen fast, pulled open the door, and stepped back to let 2 firefighters enter with practiced speed. Their boots left faint tracks of damp on the floor. Their faces were unreadable in the way trained faces are when they're looking for threats and not stories. The flashing lights outside poured into the hallway behind them, turning the walls into a pulsing rhythm of red and white. The adult blinked against it, suddenly, aware of their own mess. Bare feet, hair unbrushed, extinguisher powder clinging to their clothes, their voice too tight. "There's heat in the wall," the adult said immediately, words tumbling out. "Smoke earlier. I shut off the breaker. I used the extinguisher. My daughter, she's here, she's okay." One firefighter glanced toward the little girl, gave the smallest nod, then looked back at the adult. "Any flames?" "No," the adult said, but the smell got stronger, and the wall, right by the lamp, felt warm. The firefighter's partner lifted a handheld device from his belt, a thermal camera, and turned it on. The screen lit his face greenish for a moment. "Show me." The adult led them toward the living room, keeping the child tucked close, stepping carefully into the haze of extinguisher dust. The room looked like a different place now. Familiar furniture softened by white powder. Corners blurred. The air still carried that chemical bite. The firefighters moved with quiet efficiency, scanning the baseboards, the outlet, the lamp area, the wall. One crouched near the outlet, peering at the open cover, the discolored socket. The other raised the thermal camera toward the wall behind the lamp. He frowned. The adult's heart dropped at that expression because it wasn't neutral. It was focused, concerned, confirming something. "Yeah," he muttered, not to scare them, but because he was thinking out loud. "We've got a hot spot." "How hot?" the adult asked, voice too thin. "Not raging," he said, "but hotter than it should be." He angled the screen so his partner could see. A patch on the wall glowed brighter than the rest, a soft bloom of heat behind paint and drywall. The adult swallowed hard. The little girl's cheek pressed against their shoulder. She watched, silent, eyes wide, trying to understand why strangers were in the house at midnight. The firefighters exchanged a look, brief, practiced communication without words. The one with the thermal camera nodded toward the kitchen. "Take her outside with you," he said gently to the adult. "Just for safety. We'll take a closer look." The adult hesitated, a fierce reluctance rising. The idea of stepping out of the house felt like leaving it unguarded, like turning their back on something still lurking. But the firefighter's calm carried authority. The adult nodded and turned. Outside, the air was cool and damp. The street felt too bright, too awake for the hour. A neighbor's porch light flickered on across the way. A curtain shifted. People peeked without stepping out. The adult wrapped the blanket tighter around the little girl and carried her down the front steps, heart still thudding. She leaned her head against the adult's shoulder, half asleep again, soothed by the cold air and the steady rhythm of breathing. In the driveway, another firefighter stood near the truck, watching the house, ready. He looked at the child with a softness that didn't match his gear. "Hey there," he said quietly. "You okay?" The child didn't answer. She stared past him, toward the front door, toward the flashing lights. Then she murmured, almost to herself, "It's not done." The adult's blood turned cold. "What did you say?" the adult asked, trying to keep their voice casual, trying not to bring fear into the child's mouth. The little girl blinked, as if waking from a dream. "Nothing," she whispered. "I'm sleepy." The adult's grip tightened. Inside, muffled voices. A radio crackle, the sound of someone moving. Furniture. The adult stood in the driveway and watched the window, feeling helpless in a way that made their skin crawl. The house had been their responsibility, their wife's domain. Now strangers were inside it, opening it, testing it, reading it like a map the adult couldn't understand. And yet, part of the adult was grateful. Professionals meant explanations. Professionals meant control. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10. Time behaved strangely when your body was running on adrenaline. The front door opened again. One firefighter stepped out and approached the driveway. His helmet was off now, his face sweaty, serious. He stopped a few feet away, making sure to stay calm. "Ma'am, sir," he started, then corrected himself quickly, choosing neutrality. "We think it's a wiring issue behind that wall, possibly a loose connection or damaged insulation. It's still holding heat even with the breaker off, which means—" "What?" the adult demanded, voice cracking. "It means we're not fully confident the power is actually isolated," he said carefully, "or there's residual heat trapped. Either way, we need to open the wall to check it." Open the wall. The adult's mind balked. The wall wasn't just drywall, it was the boundary between safe and unsafe. The idea of cutting into it felt like cutting into something living. The firefighter continued, voice steady. "We're going to pull the lamp away, cut a small access, and make sure there's no smoldering behind there. In the meantime, I need you to keep your child outside with you. Do you have somewhere warm you can sit? A car?" The adult nodded numbly. They carried the little girl to the car and sat in the back seat with her, wrapping the blanket around both of them. The child's head rested against the adult's chest. Her small hand curled into the adult's shirt, gripping lightly, not afraid, just anchoring herself. The adult watched the front door through the windshield. Inside, movement. Shadows passing. The sound of tools. Then a sharp sound. Drywall being cut. The adult's chest tightened. The child stirred and looked up. "Mom doesn't like that," she said softly. The adult's throat closed. "What do you mean?" they whispered. The little girl blinked slowly, eyes drifting toward the house again. "She doesn't like when it's open," she murmured, as if describing something simple, like a cabinet door left ajar. The adult didn't know what to do with that. They didn't answer. They just held the child tighter. A few minutes later, the firefighter who'd spoken earlier returned to the driveway, walking faster now. He knocked lightly on the car window, then stepped back. The adult lowered the window a crack. Cold air rushed in. "We found it," the firefighter said. The adult's stomach dropped. "Found what?" "A loose splice behind the wall," he said. "Looks like it's been arcing. The insulation is damaged. It's been heating slowly. It could have started a fire." The adult's hands went numb. "Why didn't the breaker stop it?" the adult asked, voice shaking. The firefighter frowned. That's the problem. It wasn't fully isolated. The way it was wired, it may have been backfeeding through another circuit. We're going to shut off the main breaker now. Completely. And we want you to stay out until an electrician can do a full repair in daylight. The word backfeeding hung in the air like something alive. The adult didn't fully understand it, but they understood the implication. The danger had been connected in ways they couldn't see. The firefighter's gaze softened. You did the right thing calling, he said. You smelled it early. You shut off what you could. You got your child out. That's why this didn't turn into something worse. The adult nodded mechanically, but their mind snagged on one detail. You smelled it early. They had. But the child had noticed first. The child had said it was hot. The child had said the light blinked. The child had led them to it. The adult looked down at the little girl. She stared at the firefighter through the cracked window, expression calm. Too calm. The firefighter stepped away, returning inside. The adult rolled the window up, suddenly desperate to keep the outside world out. In the car, the child shifted, then pointed toward the living room window. Look, she whispered. The adult followed her finger. Inside the house, through the window, the living room looked like a ghost scene. Dust in the air, flashlight beams moving, the cut square, in the wall near the lamp. One firefighter knelt, peering into the opening. Then the adult saw something that made their breath stop. A small object fell from the wall cavity and landed on the floor. It was the nightlight. The same nightlight the adult had unplugged and left on the kitchen counter. It lay now on the living room floor near the hole in the wall, as if it had been inside the wall itself. The adult's mind rejected it instantly. Impossible. They had moved it. They remembered the feel of it in their hand, the warmth, the placement on the counter. No one had taken it back. No one had put it in the wall. And yet it was there. The little girl's voice came soft and steady in the dark car. She hid it, she said. The adult's throat went dry. Hid it where? The child blinked slowly, eyes still on the window. So I wouldn't touch, she whispered. She put it away. The adult stared at the nightlight through the glass until their vision blurred with tears they hadn't felt. Coming. Their chest hurt. Their hands trembled, because the wall had been closed, sealed, unopened until tonight, and the nightlight had been inside it, before the firefighters could pull it out. A surge of something moved through the adult that wasn't fear. It was grief, sharp and immediate, colliding with a kind of quiet awe they didn't want to name. Their rational mind tried to scramble for explanations. A second nightlight, a mistaken object, a trick of light. But their body remembered where it had been. Their body knew. The adult turned to the child, voice barely more than air. Did you put it there? The child shook her head, sleepy and sincere. No, she whispered. Mom did. The adult's eyes snapped back to the house. A firefighter lifted the nightlight with gloved fingers, turning it over as if confused why it had fallen out of the wall. He held it up to his partner, who shrugged. They were focused on wires and insulation, not small plastic objects. The adult's phone vibrated. In their pocket again. A message from the neighbor. Everything okay? Saw the trucks? The adult ignored it. Their attention was locked on one thing, the hole in the wall, the glowing patch of heat, the hidden nightlight, and the realization that made their stomach clench tighter than any fear so far. If something could be hidden inside a sealed wall, then something else could have been there too. Something the adult hadn't found yet. The firefighters stepped out again, moving with more urgency. Now. The one with the thermal camera glanced toward the driveway, then back at the house, then spoke into his radio. We've got another hot spot, he said. The adult's blood went cold. Another? The firefighter looked toward the adult in the car, his face serious. He raised his hand slightly, palm out, a universal signal to stay back. And then, from somewhere deep inside the house, a sharp, unmistakable sound cut through the night. A crack. Not drywall this time. Wood. Followed by the soft, terrifying whisper of something catching, small at first, but alive. The adult's hand flew to the car door handle. The child's fingers tightened in the blanket, and the living room window pulsed once with a sudden orange glow. The glow vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Not a burst, not a flare, just a brief pulse of orange behind the living room window, like a held breath finally escaping. The firefighters reacted instantly. Shouts cut through the night, sharp and controlled. Boots hit the floor inside the house. A hose was dragged across the driveway, its weight scraping against concrete. The adult yanked the car door open and stepped out, heart hammering so hard it made their ears ring. Cold air rushed in, biting against skin that still felt overheated with fear. They turned back for the child, scooping her up without thinking, cradling her tight against their chest. A firefighter shouted, "Stay back!" and the adult obeyed, stopping just short of the sidewalk. Red light. Washed over everything. The house looked unreal in it, like a photograph blinking between moments. Inside, movement, fast, purposeful. The orange glow didn't return, but the smell did. Sharper now, edged with something acrid and unmistakable. Burning wood, faint but present. The adult's stomach dropped. They pressed the child's head against their shoulder, turning her face away from the house. "It's okay," the adult whispered, more for themselves than for her. "It's okay." The child didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She stayed still in the adult's arms, listening, her body calm in a way that felt wrong and comforting at the same time. A firefighter burst back out the front door, coughing slightly, mask pulled down around his neck. He motioned to the truck, urgent. Another followed, carrying equipment. The third stayed inside. The adult's thoughts spiraled. What if they hadn't called? What if they'd gone back to bed? What if they'd told themselves the smell was nothing? The images came uninvited, each worse than the last, and they had to clamp down on them hard to keep their knees from buckling. Minutes stretched. Time broke into pieces that didn't connect properly. Then the shouting inside shifted tone. Less sharp, more controlled. The hose hissed, then stopped. Silence pressed in again, thick and heavy. The firefighter who had told them to stay back approached now, helmet on, face lit by the truck's lights. He held up a hand gently, not warning, but steadying. "We got it," he said. The adult's breath left their lungs in a rush they hadn't realized they were holding. "Got what?" "A small ignition," he said. "Nothing spread. We caught it early. You did." The words barely registered. The adult's gaze was fixed on the house, on the window that had glowed. "Is it safe?" "Not to stay," he said honestly. "But it's stable. The smolder was inside the wall cavity. Likely started when residual heat met damaged insulation. Once we opened the wall further, it had oxygen. For a second. That's probably what you saw." "Probably." The adult nodded numbly. "We've shut off the main," he continued. "We'll ventilate. Make sure there's nothing else active. But you won't be sleeping here tonight." The adult tightened their grip on the child, feeling the small weight of her, the warmth, the steady breathing. "We can stay with a neighbor," they said automatically. "That's good," the firefighter replied. "We'll let you know when it's clear to grab essentials." The adult nodded, again. The firefighter hesitated, then added quietly, "You caught this early, really early. That made all the difference." The adult looked down at the child. Her eyes were open now, watching the house over the adult's shoulder. She didn't look scared. She looked thoughtful. "Can we go now?" she asked softly. "Yes," the adult said, voice rough. We can go. They carried her toward the neighbor's house across the street, every step feeling unreal, like walking away from a version of their life that had nearly ended. The neighbor opened the door quickly, concern etched across their face. Words were exchanged. Blankets offered. The adult sat on a couch that wasn't theirs, holding the child close while sirens and radios murmured outside. From the neighbor's window, the adult could see the firefighters still moving inside the house. Shadows crossed the living room. A section of wall was missing now, a dark rectangle exposing what had been hidden. The lamp lay on its side. The couch had been dragged farther away. And there, near the open wall, something small and white rested on the floor. The outlet cover. The adult frowned. They remembered it turned over earlier, as if checked. Now it lay face up, neatly placed, not in the chaos of tools and dust, but just beyond it, as if someone had set it there deliberately. They blinked hard, telling themselves exhaustion was playing tricks on them. The child shifted in their arms. She fixed it, she murmured. The adult's chest tightened. Fixed what? The hot, the child said, simple. She fixed it so it wouldn't bite. The adult swallowed. Who fixed it, sweetheart? The child sighed, eyes half-lidding. Mom, she said again, the word heavy and light at the same time. The adult closed their eyes briefly, breathing in, breathing out, grounding themselves in the feel of the couch, the neighbor's quiet presence, the steady weight of the child. They didn't correct her. They didn't argue. They didn't want to take comfort away, even if they didn't understand it. Later, after the firefighters declared it safe enough to enter briefly, the adult returned to the house with one of them. The air inside was cooler now, cleared by fans. The smell lingered faintly, like a warning etched into memory. The firefighter walked them through what had happened, pointing to the exposed wiring, the damaged insulation. He explained it carefully, professionally. It made sense in the way explanations often do after the danger has passed. Loose connection, heat buildup, a perfect storm of small failures. What about the nightlight? The adult asked suddenly. The firefighter looked at them, confused. What nightlight? The one that fell out of the wall, the adult said. It shouldn't have been there. The firefighter frowned slightly. We didn't find anything embedded in the wall, he said. Just wiring, insulation, studs. The adult's heart skipped. I saw it. On the floor. Right there. The firefighter shook his head, gently. I think you might be mixing up objects. It's been a long night. The adult nodded slowly, though something in their stomach twisted. They glanced at the floor near the wall. The nightlight wasn't there. They searched the counter, the drawer, the kitchen table. Nothing. They didn't mention it again. They gathered essentials, clothes, medications, the child's favorite stuffed animal, and left the house behind them, the door closing with a final click that sounded louder than it should have. At the neighbor's house, the child fell asleep quickly, curled against the adult's side, her breathing deep and even. The adult sat awake long after, staring into the dark, replaying the night in fragments. The blink, the heat, the nightlight, the outlet cover. The way danger had been nudged, delayed, interrupted at just the right moments. Toward morning, exhaustion finally pulled them under. They dreamed of the house, whole again, quiet, safe. They dreamed of a woman moving through it with careful hands, tightening screws, checking cords, humming softly to herself. They dreamed of protection that didn't announce itself. When they woke, sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains. The child stirred, rubbing her eyes. Did the house burn? She asked, blunt and innocent. No, the adult said. It didn't. She nodded, satisfied. She wouldn't let it, she said, and rolled over, already thinking about something else. Later that day, an electrician arrived. Repairs were made, wires replaced. The danger explained away with diagrams and receipts and professional certainty. The adult listened, nodded, signed paperwork. The world clicked back into place around rules and logic. That evening, they returned home. The house felt different, lighter, as if something heavy had been lifted from it. The living room wall bore a neat patch where it had been opened. Fresh paint would come later. For now, it was a reminder. The adult stood in the living room alone for a moment, taking it in. They noticed small things. The lamp cord positioned farther from the wall. The outlet covers all tightened, all checked. On the coffee table, something caught their eye. The nightlight. It sat there unplugged, cool to the touch, placed neatly in the center of the table as if waiting to be noticed. The adult's breath caught. They picked it up slowly. It was the same one. They were sure of it. The faint scuff on the side. The tiny crack near the plug. They had never taken it out of the drawer. They looked around the empty room. No movement, no sound. They set the nightlight back down, hands trembling slightly. In the doorway, the child appeared, watching them. She smiled, small and calm. "She put it there so you'd see," she said. The adult knelt, pulling the child into a hug, holding her longer than usual. "So I'd see what?" they asked softly. The child shrugged, resting her chin on the adult's shoulder. "That she's still here," she said. The adult closed their eyes, tears slipping free at last. That night, as the house settled and the lights dimmed, the adult made one last round, checking outlets, cords, switches. When they reached the hallway, they paused. The nightlight glowed softly in its place again, warm but safe, casting a gentle path toward the child's room. The adult stood there, watching it for a long moment. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, a faint click echoed. Quiet, deliberate, like something being set just right. The adult's heart skipped. They turned slowly toward the sound, toward the living room, where the wall patch caught the glow just enough to reveal a thin, new shadow at its edge, as if something behind it had shifted. Again. The adult didn't move right away. A faint click in a quiet house can be nothing. A pipe cooling, wood settling, a cabinet door shifting as the air changes. It can be the normal language of an old place, the kind of sound you stop hearing after you've lived there long enough. But tonight, after smoke, and heat, and strangers in uniform, and a wall opened like a wound, the adult couldn't dismiss any sound as nothing. Not anymore. They stood in the hallway with the nightlight's soft glow at their feet, watching the living room from a distance, the way you watch an animal you don't want to startle. The patched section of wall caught the light in a thin, uneven line. The shadow at its edge was subtle, almost imagined, but it made the adult's stomach tighten anyway. They took a slow step forward. The floorboard under their heel creaked, quiet, ordinary. In the past, they would have ignored it. Tonight, their whole body reacted to it like it was an alarm. They paused, listening for another click. Nothing. The adult exhaled carefully and continued down the hallway. Their hand hovered near the wall as they walked, fingers brushing paint as if they needed something solid to keep them steady. The living room opened in front of them, familiar shapes softened by night. The couch, the lamp upright, again the coffee table with the unplugged nightlight sitting like an accusation. The adult's eyes stayed on the patched wall. They crossed the room and stopped a foot away from it. Up close, the patch looked clean, professional. Squared edges and fresh joint compound. It had been sanded down enough to feel almost smooth. Almost. If you ran your fingertips along the seam, you could still feel where the wall had been opened and closed again. A line that didn't belong. The adult lifted their hand and placed their palm flat against the patch. Cool. Normal. No warmth at all. They waited for the smell to return, for any hint of the wrong scent that had started everything. There was nothing. Just the faint, normal smell of paint and old upholstery and the soap they used now, not the one their wife used before she had already passed. The adult swallowed hard and pulled their hand away. "Okay," they whispered to the room without meaning to. "Okay." Behind them, the hallway nightlight glowed. Quietly, a small, steady circle of comfort. The adult glanced back at it, then at the coffee table nightlight, unplugged and inert. Two versions of the same thing, one in use, one waiting. They bent and picked up the unplugged one again, turning it over in their hands. It felt cool, safe, ordinary. If it hadn't been attached to so much fear, it would have been nothing more than a cheap piece of plastic you buy and forget. They carried it to the kitchen and opened a drawer. Their fingers hovered. Hesitating, then they placed the nightlight inside and pushed the drawer closed with more force than necessary. Out of sight, out of mind. At least that was the hope. They stood in the kitchen for a moment, letting the quiet settle. The house seemed calmer now, as if it had finally decided to cooperate. The adult let themselves believe that, for the first time in hours, maybe nothing else would happen. Maybe the night would be allowed to finish in peace. They turned off the kitchen light and started toward the stairs. Halfway there, they stopped and looked back at the living room again. The patched wall sat in shadow. The lamp beside it was still. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed wrong. The adult climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other still trembling just slightly. Their body felt heavy now, drained by adrenaline. The kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache. At the top of the stairs, they paused outside the child's room. The door was cracked open, a sliver of darkness inside. The adult pushed it wider with a soft touch and stepped in. The little girl lay curled on her side, blanket pulled up to her chin, stuffed animal tucked under her arm. Her face was relaxed, peaceful, as if the night had been normal for her after all. The adult stood there and watched her breathe. The woman who had already passed used to do this, not every night, but often. She would stand in the doorway and look for a moment longer than necessary, as if she were memorizing the sight. As if she knew, even then, that ordinary moments are the ones you miss the most. The adult felt the grief rise again, quiet, but sharp. They stepped closer and adjusted the blanket, tucking it around the child's shoulders. The little girl stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Are you here?" she whispered. "I'm here," the adult said softly. "Go back to sleep." The child blinked slowly. Her gaze drifted past the adult's shoulder toward the hallway, toward the faint glow from the nightlight, down the hall. "She's here too," the child murmured. The adult's throat tightened. "Sweetheart." But the child's eyes were already closing again, her mind slipping back into sleep. The adult remained still, listening to the quiet sound of her breathing, fighting the urge to say something else, fighting the urge to ask questions they weren't sure they wanted answers to. They backed out of the room, leaving the door slightly open the way their wife used to. Not fully open, not fully closed, just enough to keep the child from feeling alone. In the hallway, the nightlight's glow looked softer now, less like a warning, more like a promise. The adult went to their own room and lay down without even changing clothes. They stared at the ceiling, eyes open, waiting for sleep to come. It didn't. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw the orange pulse in the living room window. They saw smoke curling up like a whisper. They saw their child's small hand reaching for danger that didn't look like danger. They turned onto their side and looked at the empty space on the other side of the bed. It wasn't dramatic anymore. It didn't hit like a wave every second. It was a constant absence, a shape the adult had learned to live around. But tonight it felt louder. because tonight had made one thing undeniable. The woman who had already passed had been the guardian of the small things, the unnoticed things, the slow dangers that didn't announce themselves until it was too late. Now the adult had to become that guardian. They thought about calling someone to stay with them, a family member, a friend. They thought about sleeping in the child's room. They thought about leaving the house for a hotel, putting distance between them and walls that hid problems. Then they heard it, a faint sound downstairs. Not a click this time, a soft scrape. The adult sat up instantly, heart jumping like it had been tapped. They held their breath and listened. Silence. They told themselves they were imagining it. Settling furniture. A cord shifting as it cooled. Nothing. They lay back down slowly, trying to relax, trying to let sleep in. Then the scrape came again, longer this time, as if something had been dragged across the floor. The adults swung their legs out of bed and stood, bare feet cold on the hardwood. They moved toward the doorway, careful, quiet. Their pulse was loud in their ears, drowning out the small sounds of the house. In the hallway, the nightlight glowed as it had been glowing all night. The adult walked past it and started down the stairs. Halfway down, they stopped. The living room was dim, but not dark. There was a faint light coming from it, soft, bluish. The adult frowned. They hadn't left any lights on. They continued down, stepping carefully, and turned into the living room. The television was on, not loud, not playing a show. Just on the input screen, a blank blue field with a tiny message in the corner. It was the kind of thing that happens when someone bumps the remote, when the power blips, when electronics wake up for reasons you don't understand. The adult stared at it, frozen. The remote lay on the couch cushion, face up, perfectly centered, as if placed there intentionally. The adult's skin prickled. They crossed the room slowly and picked up the remote. It felt normal in their hand, slightly warm from being used. They pressed the power button. The screen went black. The room darkened. For a moment, the house felt normal again. The adult exhaled. And then, from behind them, a sound came from the kitchen, a drawer sliding open. The adult turned sharply, every muscle tensing. The kitchen was dark. The hallway nightlight cast only a faint glow into it. But the adult could see the outline of the counter, the cabinets, the shadowed shape of the drawer unit. The same drawer where they had put the unplugged nightlight earlier. The adult's mouth went dry. They took a slow step toward the kitchen, eyes fixed on the drawer. It was open an inch. Not much, but open. The adult stopped just inside the kitchen doorway. They didn't want to get closer. They didn't want to see what they might see. They also couldn't look away. The drawer slid another inch outward. Not fast, not dramatic, slow, quiet, as if guided by a careful hand. The adult's breath caught. They couldn't speak. Their mind tried to force a rational explanation. The drawer wasn't fully closed, the house tilted, vibration from footsteps, a soft, close mechanism, failing. Anything. But none of those explanations accounted for the way it moved with such intent. The drawer stopped. A pause. Then something inside it shifted with a soft plastic tap. The adult stood frozen, hand gripping the remote so tightly their knuckles hurt. And then, very gently, the drawer slid closed again. All the way. Flush. Perfect. The kitchen returned to stillness as if nothing had happened. The adult's knees felt weak. They leaned a hand against the door frame, grounding themselves, forcing air back into their lungs. They realized they had been holding their breath the entire time. They stood there for a long moment, eyes locked on the drawer front. Nothing moved. Finally, the adult stepped forward, slowly, and pulled the drawer open. Inside, among a few batteries and spare cords, was the unplugged nightlight. It sat on top of everything else, not buried, not hidden, turned so the prongs faced upward as if presenting itself. The adults stared at it. Then they saw something else, a small piece of plastic beside it. White, flat, rectangular, the outlet cover. The adult's stomach dropped. They hadn't put it in this drawer. They hadn't carried it upstairs. They hadn't touched it since earlier. It had been in the living room near the patched wall, then gone, then on the coffee table, then now here. The adult's hands trembled as they lifted it. On the back of the outlet cover, in the flashlight-bright kitchen light they hadn't turned on, but could almost see, in their mind there was a faint smudge. A mark like a fingerprint, darker than the surrounding plastic, not a full print, just a suggestion of one. The adult's throat tightened. They stood there, holding the cover and the nightlight, feeling suddenly like they were holding proof of something they couldn't explain. Not a ghost story, not a horror. Something quieter and more intimate than that. Something that belonged to the space between memory and coincidence. Upstairs, a small noise. A floorboard creak. The adult froze. The child's door. The adult's heart jumped again. They set the outlet cover down carefully on the counter, grabbed the nightlight, and moved toward the stairs, urgency returning. Not fear of the house this time, but fear of the child wandering, fear of her small feet on stairs in the dark, fear of her curiosity reaching for something else. They climbed quickly but quietly. At the top of the stairs, the child stood in the hallway again, barefoot, sleepy. Eyes half open. She looked smaller than she had earlier, swallowed by the dimness, her hair sticking up in soft strands. She wasn't crying. She wasn't calling out. She just stood there with her head tilted slightly, listening. The adult took a step toward her. "Hey," they whispered. "Come on, back to bed." The child's gaze didn't land on the adult. It stayed fixed on something behind them. Down the stairs. The adult followed her gaze instinctively, turning their head toward the darkness below. The hallway nightlight still glowed, but weaker now, as if dimming. The shadows at the bottom of the stairs looked deeper. The child lifted her arm, pointing softly, the same small gesture she'd done before, as if compelled. "She's showing you," the child murmured. The adult's pulse slammed. "Showing me what?" they whispered. The child blinked slowly, then said something that made the adult's blood run cold. "There's another one." The adult's grip tightened around the nightlight in their hand. "Another what?" The child's eyes drifted toward the patched wall area downstairs, though she couldn't see it from here. It was as if she knew exactly where to look anyway. "Another hot," she whispered. "Not there. Over there." The adult felt the air leave their lungs, because the firefighters had said they found another hot spot before the orange glow. They had contained it. They had stabilized everything. So why would the child say that now? The adult stepped closer and lifted the child into their arms, holding her tight, her small body warm and steady against the adult's racing heart. "Okay," the adult whispered into her hair. "Okay. Stay with me." They carried her down the stairs again, slower than before, each step careful, feeling the nightlight's hard plastic in their hand like a talisman. At the bottom, the living room was dark again. The television stayed off. The patched wall sat quietly. The house smelled normal. For one long second, the adult felt relief. Then the child lifted her head from the adult's shoulder and pointed. Not at the patched wall. At the far corner of the living room, near the baseboard by the bookshelf. The adult's eyes followed her finger. There, barely visible in the dim light, was a thin sliver of darkness where the baseboard met the wall, like a gap that hadn't been there before. A line too straight to be a shadow. And from that line, so faint the adult almost didn't register it, came the slightest whisper of scent. Hot plastic. The adult's body went rigid. They took one slow step toward the corner. The smell intensified immediately, as if they had stepped into it. The child tightened her arms around the adult's neck and whispered, not scared, just certain, "Don't touch." The adult stopped. They stood there in the middle of the living room, holding their child, staring at the corner where the wall met the floor, realizing they were about to call for help again, realizing this might not be over, realizing the house might have more secrets than one repair could fix. And then, from inside that corner, inside the wall, came the softest sound. A tiny click, like something shifting into place, like a switch being turned. And the nightlight in the adult's hand, unplugged, inert, blinked once. The blink was so quick the adult almost convinced themselves it hadn't happened. One soft pulse, a tiny flicker of light against the adult's thumb, and then nothing, just the hard plastic of the unplugged nightlight in their hand, cold and ordinary again. If they had been alone, if their child hadn't whispered with that same calm certainty, they might have written it off as a trick of their eyes, a reflection from the hallway, a leftover glow from the streetlights outside. The mind grabbing for patterns after a night full of fear. But the child's arms tightened around the adult's neck, and her voice stayed steady. "Don't touch," she repeated. The adult didn't move. They stood there in the living room, bare feet on the rug, holding the child like a shield, staring at the far corner by the bookshelf as if staring hard enough could force the wall to explain itself. The gap at the baseboard wasn't wide. It was the kind of tiny separation you might never notice in daytime. A line where shadow lived a little too neatly. And the smell, hot plastic, was unmistakable now that they were aware of it, faint but present, like a warning written in air. The adult's mind tried to organize facts. The main breaker had been shut off last night. The electrician had repaired the damaged splice behind the patched wall. They had been told it was stable. They had receipts. They had a professional standing in their living room earlier, nodding, speaking calmly, returning the house to logic. So why would the smell return? The adult took one slow step backward, away from the corner, as if distance itself could reduce risk. The child's small body stayed pressed against them, warm and heavy with sleep. Her hair smelled like shampoo and blanket and the softness of being unaware. The adult whispered, "Okay, okay." Not to the child, to themselves. They carried her toward the kitchen, keeping their eyes on the corner until it disappeared behind the doorway. Their heart hammered in their chest, not in sudden panic this time, but in a slow, relentless dread, the feeling that the house had more hiding places than you could ever check. In the kitchen, they set the child down on a chair and wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her legs dangled, bare toes brushing the chair's edge. "I want water," she murmured. "I'll get you water," the adult said, voice too gentle, too controlled, as if calm could keep the world from tipping again. They poured water with shaking hands and offered it to her. She took a small sip, then rested the cup in her lap like it was heavy. Her gaze drifted toward the living room doorway again. "Is it hot?" she asked. The adult swallowed. "I don't know," they admitted. "But we're going to be careful." The child nodded once, solemn, like she understood the concept of careful better than most adults. The adult reached for their phone, fingers clumsy, and scrolled until they found the electrician's number. It was late. Too late. But the adult couldn't sleep with that smell in the air. They couldn't lie in bed and pretend they hadn't noticed. They couldn't ask their heart to slow down while the wall whispered heat. They hit call. It rang. Once, twice, then voicemail. So, adult hung up and immediately called again because fear has no patience. While it rang, they glanced toward the drawer where they had found the outlet cover and nightlight earlier. The drawer sat still, innocent. The nightlight in their hand sat on the counter now. Unplugged. Quiet. Not blinking. The call went to voicemail again. The adult pressed their fingers against their forehead and forced themselves to think in steps, like a checklist their wife would have made. Power, distance, air, help. They moved to the hallway and flipped on a light out of reflex, then stopped when they remembered the main breaker had been shut off earlier. But the hallway light came on anyway, bright and steady. The adult froze. Their breath caught like they'd been punched. The lights were on. Not just the hallway. The kitchen overhead was still on from earlier. The living room lamp in the corner glowed faintly. The house had power. But how? The adults stared at the light switch, then at their child, then back toward the living room. A cold wave rolled through them, the kind that starts in your stomach and crawls up your spine. They whispered, almost involuntarily. The main was off. The child watched them, eyes heavy but attentive. "It came back," she said, like she was telling them it had started raining again. The adult's hands began to shake harder. Had someone turned it back on during the day? The electrician? The fire department? The adult themselves? They searched their memory and found only exhaustion and fear. They remembered signing papers. They remembered being told it was safe. They remembered trying to breathe normally again. They didn't remember flipping the main back on. And yet, the house was alive with electricity again, quietly humming, pretending nothing had happened. The adult moved fast now. They crossed the living room in 3 steps, heading straight for the breaker panel. Their child's eyes followed them, small face calm, as if this was simply how the house behaved now. Unpredictable, needing attention. The adult yanked open the panel door. The switches stared back in neat rows. The main breaker at the top was in the on position. Their stomach dropped. They reached up and flipped it off. The house went quiet immediately. Lights blinked out. The living room fell into darkness. The kitchen light died mid-hum. The refrigerator's low sound vanished like a breath sucked back in. And in that sudden silence, the smell in the far corner seemed to sharpen, as if the house, deprived of power, wanted the adult to notice the source even more. The adult stood still, hand still on the main breaker, listening. No crackle, no hiss. Just the steady quiet of a house without electricity. They left the main off. Then they returned to the kitchen, picked up the child, and carried her to the front door. They didn't hesitate. They didn't bargain with themselves. They stepped outside into the cool night air and walked across the street to the neighbor's house again, knocking softly but urgently. The neighbor opened the door in seconds, their face still wearing the concern from the night before, as if it had never fully left. "It's happening again," the adult whispered. The neighbor's eyes widened. "Do you want to come in?" "Yes," the adult said, stepping inside quickly, holding the child close. They sat on the neighbor's couch again, like the house had decided this was now part of their routine. The child curled against the adult's side with the blanket. The adult's phone lay heavy in their hand, screen glowing faintly, the electrician's number still on it. The neighbor offered tea. The adult shook their head. Their mouth was too dry to swallow anything besides air. "I smelled hot plastic," the adult said, forcing the words out. "In another corner, by the bookshelf. And then, the lights were on again. The main breaker was on. I swear I didn't turn it on." The neighbor's brows pulled together. "Could it have flipped back on by itself?" "No," the adult said, voice sharp with certainty, then softened because certainty felt fragile now. "I don't think so." The child shifted, pressing her cheek against the adult's arm. "She doesn't want it hot," she murmured. The neighbor glanced at the child, then looked away quickly, like they didn't want to intrude on something private. The adult stared through the neighbor's window at their own house across the street, dark now with the main off, sitting quietly as if it were innocent again. The outline of the bookshelf corner was invisible from here, but the adult could still smell it in memory. That faint, wrong scent, like a secret. They called again. This time, they didn't call the electrician first. They called emergency services. Their voice was steadier now, not because they were calm, but because fear had hardened into action. They explained. Electrical smell, possible heat in wall, main breaker switched off, child out of house. The operator asked questions. The adult answered them. Help was sent again because professionals are trained to treat heat in a wall like what it is, a risk that doesn't need flames to become real. While they waited, the adult kept watching the house, and that's when they saw it. A faint glow in an upstairs window, not bright, not dramatic, just a small rectangle of light, like a nightlight, like a hallway lamp, like something had turned itself on inside a house that was supposed to be dead of power. The adult's heart stopped. They leaned forward, pressing their palm against the glass of the neighbor's window, eyes wide, brain refusing to accept it. The glow held steady for a moment, then blinked out. The neighbor, seeing the adult's face, followed their gaze. "What?" they asked. The adult's voice came out as a whisper. "There was light upstairs." The neighbor's face tightened. "But you shut off the main." "I did," the adult said. "I did." The child lifted her head slightly. Her eyes were open now. She stared at the house with a calm focus that didn't belong to a sleepy child. "She's showing you," the child said again. The adult's throat tightened. "Showing me what?" The child didn't answer right away. She blinked slowly, then pointed. Not toward the corner this time, not toward the living room. She pointed upward toward the second floor, toward a window near the back of the house. "The box," she whispered. The adult's skin prickled. "What box?" "The box that makes it hot," the child said, like she was describing the toaster. "It's up." The adult's mind spun. Upstairs, a box, heat, electricity. What did they have upstairs that could be a box? A charger? A battery pack? A toy? A router backup? Something plugged in? Something forgotten? Then memory hit. A small spare power supply they kept in the hallway closet upstairs, inside a storage bin. An old battery backup unit someone had given them years ago, tucked away because it seemed useful but was never really used. The kind of thing you forget exists until you need it. The kind of thing that could, if faulty, warm up quietly and smell like plastic. But the main was off. Unless the main wasn't truly isolating everything like the firefighter had said. Unless there was backfeeding again. Unless something was connected to something else. Unless the house had a second source. A generator? No, they didn't have one. A solar system? No, not here, unless the box was something else entirely. The sirens arrived before the bay. Adult could finish the thought. Red and white light painted the street again, turning the quiet neighborhood into a scene that felt too familiar too quickly. Firefighters stepped out, brisk and focused, remembering the address, remembering the night before. The adult met them at the neighbor's door, child held tight. "Another smell," the adult said. "Different place. Main is off, and I saw a light upstairs." The firefighter's face tightened. "You saw a light with the main off?" "Yes," the adult insisted. "Upstairs window, just for a second." The firefighter exchanged a look with their partner. "Any chance it was a reflection?" "I don't know," the adult admitted, because honesty mattered now. "But I don't think so." They crossed the street, staying back as instructed while the firefighters entered the house again. The adult stood on the neighbor's steps, child in arms, watching their own front door swallow the men in gear. Minutes passed. The house stayed dark. Then a firefighter stepped out and looked directly at the adult. His expression had changed, not calm, not reassuring. Alert. He raised his voice just enough to carry. "We need you to tell us if you have any battery backups, generators, or anything that can supply power independently." The adult's heart slammed. "Battery backup," they said quickly. "An old one. Upstairs, I think. In the hall closet." The firefighter nodded sharply and turned back inside. The adult felt the child's small hand grip their shirt. "That one," she whispered against the adult's neck. "The box." The adult closed their eyes briefly, fighting the urge to break into the house themselves, fighting the urge to run upstairs and rip open every closet, every bin, every hidden corner until the smell had nowhere left to hide. They waited, because waiting was what you did when people with training were inside your house. The door opened again. A firefighter stepped out holding something. A black rectangular battery backup unit, dusty, heavier than it looked. He carried it like it mattered, like it was unstable. His partner followed with a second item, a power strip scorched at one end, cords tangled. The firefighter came down the front steps, eyes on the adult. "We found this upstairs," he said. "It was warm, smelled like it was heating, not plugged into the wall, but connected." "Connected how?" the adult demanded, voice tight. The firefighter's jaw tightened. "That's the part we're still figuring out. It shouldn't have had, power with the main off." The adult's blood went cold, because the firefighter wasn't saying it's fine. He wasn't saying it's nothing. He wasn't saying probably. He was saying it shouldn't have been possible. The child lifted her head and looked at the box in the firefighter's hands. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if recognizing it. "She moved it," the child whispered. The adult's voice cracked. "Moved what?" The child pointed at the power strip the firefighter carried. "She pulled it away," she said, "so it wouldn't bite the house." The adult's breath caught, tears rising again, unwanted and sharp. The firefighter glanced between them, confusion flickering across his face. Then he turned away, focusing on the equipment, on the facts he could control. He set the battery unit on the curb carefully, away from everything. Then he looked back at the adult and said quietly, "We're going to need to inspect the whole electrical system. Something in this house is feeding power when it shouldn't. That's not safe." The adult nodded, throat too tight to speak. The firefighter turned back toward the house. "Until we know what's happening, you and your child should not go back inside." The adult held the child closer, staring at the dark windows of the house they'd lived in, the house that had held their life, the house that now felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. And in the quiet that followed, the adult heard it. Faint, distant, almost imagined. A soft click from upstairs. From inside a house with the main breaker off, as if something, somewhere, had just turned itself on again. The house stayed dark. No lights flickered. No hum returned. The silence that settled after the firefighter's words felt different from the silence before. Heavier, but finally still. The battery backup was carried away and placed inside a containment bag. The scorched power strip followed. The firefighters moved through the house one last time, checking every room, every outlet, every hidden line. They spoke quietly, professionally, their voices low and steady as they traced wires and verified what could be verified. In the end, one of them stood in the doorway and looked at the adult with something close to relief. "We've isolated it," he said. "The backup unit was feeding power into a circuit it shouldn't have. Faulty internal wiring. Rare, but it happens. With the main off, it still had stored energy, enough to heat, enough to cause what you smelled." The adult nodded, slowly. The explanation made sense in the way explanations often do. Clean, technical, final. A problem with a cause, a danger with an origin. "And now?" the adult asked. Now it's gone, the firefighter said. Removed completely. We'll recommend a full inspection tomorrow, but the immediate risk is over. Over. The word landed gently, like something set down after being carried too long. The adult looked down at the child in their arms. She was watching the firefighter, not scared, not curious, just listening. When he finished speaking, she nodded once, small and satisfied. "Told you," she whispered. The adult swallowed. They returned home just before dawn. The house felt empty in a new way, not hollow, not threatening, just quiet, as if whatever had been moving through it all night had finally stepped back. The patched wall looked ordinary now. The bookshelf corner smelled normal. The air held no warnings. The adult walked through every room once more, slowly, deliberately, touching walls, checking outlets, opening closets. Everything stayed still. Everything stayed calm. In the hallway, the nightlight glowed softly again, plugged in, safe, exactly where it belonged. The adult paused there for a long moment. "Thank you," they whispered, not to the house, not to the nightlight, but to the memory of careful hands, of attention paid before danger announced itself, of a mother who had already passed but had never truly left. Upstairs, the child slept peacefully. Her face relaxed, one arm flung over her pillow. The adult watched her breathe, feeling something finally loosen in their chest. That morning, life resumed. Breakfast was made. Shoes were found. The day moved forward, carrying with it a story no one else would ever fully understand. A story without headlines, without flames, without proof anyone would accept. But some protections don't leave evidence, they only leave outcomes. That night, as the adult turned off the lights and stood in the hallway, one last time, the nightlight glowed steady and warm. Not hot. Never hot again. From somewhere deep in the quiet house came a sound, not a click this time, not a warning, just the soft settling of a place at rest. And for the first time since she had already passed, the adult slept without listening for danger.